Yeah. Now, the most of the blacks at that time wanted to identify with things American. Most of them. They straightened their hair. They wanted to enjoy the classical movement of the three B's, the Bach, the Beethovens, the young things. They even those things which they did not understand, they wanted to get into that so that they would have the approval of the whites who were in power. Now it was these blacks which the Communist Party recruited. Now, well, of course, with a sprinkling of those that had found the national identity, but that was rubbed off in the party in favor of united working class.
It's interesting because you have a couple of people who were active in Harlem, I guess Cyril Briggs and Richard Moore, who had come out of
the Blood Brotherhood.
Yeah. And from what I gather, at least from what Harry Haywood told me, in 33 and 34, they were kind of eased out of work in the section when James Ford came in.
Yeah, James Ford he couldn't stand it.
Were you familiar with the background of that, or just?
Yeah, well, just this, that when they weren't trusted, neither Briggs nor Moore were trusted. Ford didn't trust them because they had national ascendancy. And while Richard was a great orator, and just on those occasions when we needed an orator, well, we would call Richard for that. But he was not an administrator, and he had this tendency toward nationalism, and Ford did everything he could, see. He even tried to have Richard expelled from the party. And the same thing is true with Briggs. Briggs went down to the Daily Worker, and he was,
So he was out of his range.
No, but then they picked on him even then, you see, until finally he got out entirely. So that even that little voice within the party, see, was completely cut off.
But the curious thing is that it seems like in the early 30s, Briggs and Moore were like the leading people in Harlem, or among the leading people in Harlem.
Yeah.
And the party, while it was very active, didn't consolidate.
Yeah, prior to.
And it wasn't until James Ford came in that it began to really deepen and consolidate and become a real force throughout the community.
Yeah. Well, that was due to a number of things. Well, first of all, Moore was not an administrator, neither was Briggs. And the party at, say, 33 wasn't the same party that it was in 35. So that when Ford came in, the best administrators, two of the best that they found, Sass and Lou Sass and Charney, were given to Ford. See, Sass, who was with me, and Charney, who was with Ford. Now, then there began to be instituted regular administrative methods. You know, the question of dues collection, the question of systematic recruitment, the question of registration of membership, the question of regular membership meetings being held, of a full coordinated and you had an orchestrated party. See, that once you developed a program, this objective, this is our objective. First we had an overall political objective. Then you had certain objectives like the Empire Cafeteria, the stores on 125th Street. Now certain sections or organizations had that as the concentration. And this one had the yards of the Transport Workers Union and so forth. So that it was only with these administrators coming in. They were not known and not heard, but they were felt, you see.
Yeah, it's interesting because there seem to be very few whites in reading through, the newspaper accounts who make an impression and publicly in the Harlem Party. They're mainly functionaries and administrators, and
that's all. That was all the administrators. You see, they had these administrative jobs, and they did them well. They did all of did these jobs very well. So that while they didn't have to do with advancing the line of the party, see, this Ford did. In the section, the smallest organization I did. And they consolidated and kept the wheels going.
So they kept a low profile.
Yeah. Now, so without this kind of attention, Briggs and Moore were just floundering around, see. But then the party began to pay special attention to Harlem. And that was when you got this United Front development there. And the party establishing its hegemony, more or less, in the Harlem organization. We had organization in most of the schools and all of the home relief bureaus and organization of the transport workers and the development of job campaigns. That was a big thing, you see.
When there was a serious disciplinary problem within the party, who was the person who, cracked the whip? Was that Ford's role when there was a crisis of any kind, or?
Well, it depends where it was. Now, when if there was a crisis in the section, first it comes before the section committee, you see. And if it can't resolve that problem, that is, when I was the head of the committee, it would come directly before me, see. Before me and the committee. And we would attempt to resolve that. If we couldn't resolve it, that is, if we voted to expel, say, then it went on up to Ford, and if they expelled him, and then it went on to the state. That is, if the person kept appealing, it would go that way. Or usually, if we had a problem in the section that we figured was too big, then we'd invite Ford, and he would take charge in that sense.
He comes across, from the various things that I've read and heard, as a very ambivalent kind of figure, and in some ways very formidable. That he was not considered theoretically very deep. Occasionally you come across a reference to him as a black Uncle Tom by someone who would leave the party, and yet he seemed, on the other hand, to wield a tremendous amount of power and authority and to be very much feared by, and also a very effective person in many ways.
That's a correct reading. He was exactly that. You can't say very much more about him. He was a funny guy, you see. Since we worked together on the same committee and dealing with the same problems. I did a lot of writing, I wrote a lot of pamphlets and a lot of articles at the time. Well, sometimes I would give an article to him, and say, well, what do you think of this? And he would say, that's good. Just like, I'll sign it with you. Well, he kept on doing this, and I didn't make any difference to me. You see, I wasn't writing this for ego tripping, and so many of the things that I wrote, sometimes he would sign it all together, so that when you take a book to the Negro on the Democratic Front, half of it would be mine. And well, that was all there was to that. It didn't mean anything to me at the time. I don't know whether it should mean anything to me now, but that's the way he was. Now I just say that to demonstrate that he was conscious always of his image. See, his dealing with this question theoretically. See, like, for instance, there was a story on about Ethiopia. I can't think of what it was. Now, if I had the Negro on the Democratic Front, you don't have it.
Yeah.
Do you have it?
Yeah, I have a copy.
You see, by his writing this, it would establish him as a leader in this, you see.
Right. You wrote the introduction.
I wrote the introduction.
But actually you wrote most of the book.
Yeah, well, it was easier then for me to write the introduction. Oh, yeah. Sense of the Ethiopian people, see, that was such an incident. Well, when this was written, you see, well, I just turned it over to him to okay, and immediately then he says, "Oh yes," he says, "Would you certainly keep that, huh?" Well, sure, that's all. I'm just writing it for the party, and we'll let it go at that. See, and so he read that. He said certain Negro nationalist organizations under the influence of demagogic propaganda and so forth. Well, I went on to answer the nationalists on Ethiopia. Says Negro delegates were sent to the Conference of Italian Workers and so forth, and how the Italians responded to that situation. Well, now this other one was written by Bassett. the one of the coffin back in government. It was all the historical roots of Negro liberation.
In many ways, it sounds like he almost sounds in some ways like someone who would have made a very good regular politician.
Yeah, he would have made a good regular politician.
It's very curious that the party attracted personalities who, in other circumstances, would have been very successful in bourgeois society.
Yeah, he would have been very successful with that. Yeah.
He just came 40 years before his time.
That's right. So that the image that comes out, that comes through from what you have read there, would be absolutely true. You see, in other words, he wanted to keep his image as a leader before the people at all times, and he was able to do this because he had lesser people, see, like Ted Bassett and myself, who at least would read theoretical stuff a lot of times, and we would try to write theoretical stuff, you see. And so he would take Ted's stuff and my stuff, and appropriate it for his own ends. I would imagine that would be permissible, given what.
Yeah, I mean, every president is doing the same thing, or politician. They have a core of speechwriters and ghostwriters.
So that, especially since all of us had the one idea, that is, the bigger you make your leader, the more authority that your leader has, then the more authoritative is your organization. And therefore, we would all contribute to developing the strength and the leadership of an individual leader.
Was I've seemed to come across some signs of jealousy and resentment of the fact that Ford was put in that position.
Yes, you had that. You had on the part of Ben Davis. You see, Ben Davis was resentful of Ford. Now he had his own personal reasons, but Ben Davis never thought that Ford was a leader, because he said to me once, he said, especially after this book, see, because I did all the editing on this book here. Jerome and V.J. Jerome, and I did all the editing on it. And so when the book came out, Ben Davis sneered at it and said, well, there's only one goddamn thing that's good about that, and that's the introduction. Which gives you...
But it's funny, because Davis, during 1936, was writing all these laudatory articles about James Ford.
He was in the Daily Worker.
Right.
At the time. But you see, well, as I look back, I conclude that a lot of these people had petty bourgeois mentalities. You see, they were looking at one thing, and including Ford himself. See. These petty bourgeois mentalities is what clashed. You see, they are each maneuvering for position, in a certain way, and then there were those of us who were just there for the furthering the program. You see. And it didn't matter to us just how it was advanced, but we were just like a man just rolling a stone up a hill. You see, that said, well, we'll know when we get to the top of it. All of us will be over it. You know, that's what's all.
Manning Johnson, when he left the party, was particularly vituperative about Ford, but he seemed like a strange character.
Oh, well, you can't give any validity to anything that he would say, because whatever Ford had said about him, you see, would be correct. You know, if Ford had no trust in him, well, he was absolutely correct.
Ford didn't trust him even when he was in the party in Harlem.
You see, Johnson he was a dandy, you see. Well, a dandy, I mean in the bad sense. You know, he liked well-cut, well-tailored clothing, and then, of course, he mistreated women, you see, which was very bad. He was in Buffalo as the organizer. He had a wife. I think she had a child and left her. And he had this other wife here in Harlem, and he ran off. He left her, and it wasn't out of poverty that he left, you see, but just out of just being no damn good. That was all. Well, the party shielded him, you know, from all of this, while he was wearing his $75 suits and what.
Which by today's inflation is like a $300 suit.
Yeah, which is like a $300 suit today. And then when he was no longer in a position to buy these suits, he sold out to the FBI and the congressional committees. They squeezed him and squeezed everything they could out of him. And when he no longer had any connections and could speak with no authority about anything, they threw him out. And there he was. He died in the gutter out here.
It's interesting the variety of people who became involved.
Yes.
Because which in one sense, I guess, reflects the strength of the movement, that you attracted so many different kind of people for so many different kind of motives.
Exactly so. Well, as I told you, that there were very few people, I mean black people, very few, during a period of 31 to 38, even as late as 40, 41, and 41. There were very few people who were not affected by the work of the party. Very few black intellectuals who were not affected. Now, I could call the roll of the academics. There were a few I know, those who opposed and who stayed opposed, and some of them who were for and who moved away and became anti later, and so forth. And among the writers, the poets, I think I've gone over this with you before. The writers, poets, educators, and lawyers, and so forth. They were all of the intellectual, black intellectuals, were affected. Now, it has been said, this might be an interesting thing to explore, but it was said by Lightfoot. He said he told me this at the time. Well, he didn't tell me. He told all of us because he was in a meeting when he discussed this. He said that he had a meeting with, I don't know, some committee, investigator or whatnot, and it went something like this. This is what he told him, and it happens to be true. See what he told me. He said that in 1930 and in 1931, that the Negroes were just about fed up with the American system. See, they had almost got to the point, you see, where they saw no future at all in it. They didn't know which way to turn, and they were just threshing around looking for leadership. Now, along came the Communist Party, and giving the Negroes this leadership, giving them a direction, it directed them back toward the American system. See, it gave them that sense of being American. You see, and this is true.
That's interesting, because in a certain sense, one can almost then see a continuity between what the party did in the 30s and the civil rights movement, which in terms of the atmosphere of it, if not the actual organizational leadership.
It was a continuation, because it had given these black people a belief in the American system, because the party had taught them under Browder's communism as 20th century Americanism. We had undergone a thorough study of American history. See? This was all through the party. Thorough study of American history, of the American Revolution, of
committees of correspondence.
Yeah, the committees of correspondence, and the relationship between the committees of correspondence and the political party, the Declaration of Independence, and the Constitution, the debates on the Constitution, the 3/5 clause, and so forth, and the dialectical development of the Constitution. You see, all of this came as a result of the Communist Party's program. Now, most of us would never have studied this history, you see, not as closely as we studied it in the Communist Party. And this gave the black people at the time, it gave the black leaders, those that studied the thing, gave to them a new understanding, so that they were able to represent this logically to masses of black people. And in a sense, it ushered in this new day, so to speak, wherein you had your Martin Luther King, who himself was affected by the party. He had at one time been a daily worker reader, see, in his student days. But it gave him a belief in the perfectibility of the American system. And having given the blacks this, you see, it saved them, but it saved the system.
That's very wow.
See, it saved the system. Now there were well, I won't go into that. There was a number of movements, you see, to the other way, which were of course wrong. The Pacific movement, for example. You haven't dealt with that.
Yeah. Were they strong in Harlem, the Pacific movement?
They were strong in Detroit. They were strong throughout the Middle West, and they that was what spawned Elijah Muhammad. You see, but he was from the Pacific movement.
Huh?
But the Communist Party won most of the blacks away from that